Another example from a friend, and this one is from South America, so Spanish speaker, which I know you have a ton of experience with.
Hmm.
And it's when she was saying can versus can't. And to my ear, it's almost identical. I can barely hear that T sound, like, like I can do that. And I'm like,
Yeah,
was that can or can't? So like, what's
yeah.
the cause? What's kind of the root of that?
Yeah, this is actually a really good one, and it's not only challenging for Spanish speakers. Actually, I find that all of my students, or almost all of my students, struggle with this, and it's really interesting because you'll notice that what non-native speakers tend to do to avoid being misunderstood is they will, instead of saying can't, they'll say cannot, 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 right? To make it really, really clear. But as we know, it's not very common for us to say cannot. We're usually going to use that contraction. So the way that you want to look at it here and break it down is that, first of all, there's the positive and the negative. Okay, and the positive has two versions. It can either be a content word or a function word. So I think most of the time we're using it as a function word. So we're going to make a reduction and we're just going to pronounce it really short and low, like this: kin, right? So you could say I can go, or can you help, or when can we meet, right? So that can, it is not an important piece of the message. If we want to make it important, then we'll emphasize it, pronounce it really clear. We'll say can, right? I can go. You can help. And what you notice is that I'm sliding my voice all the way to the, from the vowel to the N. And can. It's kind of like a soft, just lazy slide, glide into a really soft stop. Now, we want to focus on the negative. The negative only has one form, and the negative form is always short, it's quick, and it has this stop sound quality. So we have several stop sounds in English, and specifically with this stop T, it happens when the T is at the, when nothing comes after the T, or if a consonant comes after the T. So, for example, if I said like get with the program, get with, right? I'm not releasing this T. I'm saying, not saying get with. I'm just tightening up the vocal cords back here. Get with the program. So I'm tightening the vocal cords, get, and then I release. If there's a consonant sound, I'll release that afterwards. So that's what we're doing here with can't. All right. So our American ears are tuned to hear the difference between this soft, lazy, easy stop and this abrupt stop. So the difference would be can, positive, can't, can, can't. Right? It's the same if you were to compare like e and eat, or he and heat, like that. So it's about the abruptness of the stop, and you know, it's not a easy thing to start doing right away. You do have to spend some time teaching your, or tuning your ears to hear that first, then teaching your body how to do it. But there is a direct, linear, logical path that you can take to start being able to not only hear those sounds, but create those sounds in a way that will be clear for our ears. So the key is the stop T, and you can find video explanations there on my website and on my YouTube channel.
This reminds me, what's so interesting about your content, the stuff you post on LinkedIn, is these examples. And you will put stuff out there where at first I think like, no, like that's not what I do. And then you have all the examples, and then I say it and like, what, you're like, yes, like that is how I actually speak. So it's kind of like in retrospect, then it becomes obvious. Like the example you had, I think was just a day or two ago about front end developers, right? Or
Hmm.
front end. And like I would say, like, if you ask me, do I pronounce the T in that? I would say, of course I do.
Yeah,
But I don't, and nobody does.
yeah.
So it's like I just love that kind of like realizations and things we can learn about how we actually use language versus how it's printed or how we think we are.
Exactly, and that's really the main thing. I mean, until you hear that, there's no chance of you using it that way. So that's why, the content that I put out is just based on, listening Yeah, I put the examples, even slow them down so people can really tune their ear for it. That is the most important thing. The more acute your ear can become and you can start hearing the sounds the way that we do, the better chance you have of making a permanent change.
I remember reading in one of your posts that English has far more unpronounced letters, if I'm representing this right, than people realize.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about a few of those? And is that like related to the schwa sound?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it comes back to the rhythm, the rhythmic contrast here, which is basically the system. It's the design, it's the plan. So, like I was mentioning earlier, right, we overpronounce the stressed syllables and then we tuck away the unstressed syllables. So, one way that you're going to see that quite often is what we call reductions. So reductions happen when we have a word that is just there for grammatical purposes. It's not giving us any details, right? It's not enhancing the conversation. So you could say, talk about words like was or of, or we talked about can already, right? So
Mhm.
when we have a reduction, we do the opposite of when we have a stress syllable. Stress syllable, we're all vowel. We want all vowel. Unstressed syllable, we don't want vowel. So that's why we wouldn't say was, we would say was. I was I was waiting, right? And that way, again, we get that rhythmic contrast. So we can hear waiting and we know to key in on that. Or same as of, right? I'm tired of all this, right? I'm tired of all this, tired of all this. Our brains can't understand. This is the system of stress time language. Okay,
Mhm.
stress time language means that if you give us all of the syllables equal in our ears, there's no logic. We can't sort it out. We need to have the important parts standing out and the unimportant parts tucked away. So I've got tons of videos and examples about it, but those are a few. But that is the reason. We just need very, very great contrast, and that's the way our ears are designed in our to hear the language. And if you give it to us all even, right? That's why if you hear a Mandarin speaker, right, they're gonna give you every I was going to the store and I left my keys in the car. Instead of I was going to the store and I left, right? And I left my keys in the car. So that's the way our brains are tuned. And if you don't give it to us like that, we really have to focus and try very hard to understand what exactly you're saying.
That makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. I think you covered a, a lot of my questions with that answer,
All
but
right.
I did have another one in here just about like vowel variations, and I know like they can slide all over the place in different languages, and how that, depending on what someone's background is. So, what ones in English tend to really trip people up more than others? Are there some, or it depends on what their first language is, or how does that work?
I would say one of the things that most students tend to struggle with is openness. So again, the fact that we're emphasizing these stressed vowel sounds, a lot of them require more openness than students are used to. So for example, you could take my name or your name, right? If you watch the mouth movement that I'm going to give a lot of attention here in the stressed form, Ray, Josh, right? I'm creating
Uh,
all this space here.
yeah,
Most
yeah,
non-native speakers don't feel comfortable here. They're used to creating a tighter channel where they're kind of using like their mouth and squeezing the muscles here together to push this way so that their jaw is already locked in. So when they say Ray or Josh, right,
yeah.
Ray, it's not the same as Ray,
Uh
right?
huh.
And that's
Right.
there's a lot of vowels that you need to have more openness, and that's one thing that students have to learn to use their body differently. You could also say maybe diphthongs. So a diphthong is like a vowel usually has one mouth position, like mine,
Hmm.
Josh. Yours is
Uh-huh.
a, right? So we have to hear this sliding from the beginning to the end.
Uh-huh.
A,
Uh-huh.
right? If it's just right, just one position, right, it doesn't work, right? We have to go Ray. One that's really funny here, and I have videos on this too, but a lot of times students will try to say the word focus, which has the O sound.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't say O and you say focus,
You get in
there you
trouble.
go. There you go, right? And if you're giving a presentation and you say focus on the table, right? You better hope you're with some good people.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that one. Wow.
So
It
yeah.
reminds me, this reminds me of when I was in Australia and my friend who moved to Australia was pronouncing my name in American English, and his buddy John asks, he's like, "So Ray, how do you spell that?" I'm like, "Ray." And he's like, "Oh, it's rye."
Well, yeah, the Australian thing is that's I mean, I have videos doing pronunciation comparisons with Australians and other people, and I mean, to me I'm just a tourist. I'm just a spectator for what's going on over there, but they have a whole different set of
Yeah,
things.
I
I mean,
love your clips when you're doing like the English, the American versus Irish, British or Australian or South African, all that. You have so many contacts all over the place. These coaches, it's awesome.
it's really
Uh,
fun, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we're going to talk about coaching in a minute, but before we get to that, what can people do outside of coaching to kind of work on their accent? Like what's like the homework that people can do to try to pick up and work on these things? Is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, like my whole agenda for my program and my students to teach them how to guide themselves. That's the most important thing. And there's things that you can do right away, right, once you know about them. So, for example, the most important thing is learning to let your ears guide you. Okay?
Mhm.
If you can listen to audios and not concentrate on the words or the letters and just focus on the characteristics of the sounds, you can go quite a ways with that because you'll be hearing things the way that they're designed to be. The other thing I would say is that a tool that I use a lot, is just when you're using your eyes, not to stare at the words, but to watch your mouth movement. Okay, so if you have your camera and you have a clip of a native speaker, and you see the native speaker is saying, right, we'll just say Ray, Ray, and you're recording yourself and you're saying Ray, Ray, or Josh, Josh, you could know right away that you want your mouth to look very similar. Obviously, not exactly the same, but very
Mhm.
similar to that native speaker. So, if you let your ears guide you and you use visual cues and try to imitate mouth movement, you can really take yourself quite a ways with by yourself without any help with pronunciation training.
Awesome, awesome. Sounds like a great tip. Regarding coaching, then, what I see as the advantage of coaching in kind of any scenario is you get that immediate feedback,
Mm.
right? Someone is one thing to look for the feedback yourself. It's another thing to have a person, an independent person watching you and observing and seeing what you're doing. And especially if they have experience doing it over and over again. So like, can you kind of elaborate on the advantage or what do you think are the big positives of working with a coach for accent reduction?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's just puts you on the most efficient path, right? That's one of the things that students say to me. I mean, there's so many topics. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to focus on. I don't know if I'm ready to move forward. So, as a coach, I know the path of success. I know which characteristics that a student needs to exhibit to see progress. I know the characteristics of students that don't see progress, right? So I can help keep you on track and making sure you're doing things as effective as possible. Obviously, it's not a miracle pill, right? It's not going to, make you change your accent overnight, but I see a lot of time wasted. And the other thing about this is that changing your pronunciation, if you already know English, it's more challenging because you're trying to change a habit. It's not learning something new. And
Yeah.
changing a habit is a very fine line to walk, right? So if you're
Mhm,
practicing
mhm.
and you're doing something that is not towards your goal, you're actually reinforcing those habits and digging yourself farther into that hole. So I can make
Yeah.
sure that
Yeah.
you're, moving away from the old habits, really creating muscle memory to form the new ones.
Gotcha. What I like in some of the clips that you have on LinkedIn is how you have, what I see as like technical proficiency, and you can tell people like where the sound is coming from and how they have to move their tongue, or you kind of like what are the nuts and bolts for producing the sound that they want rather than what they are producing.
Yeah.
So along those lines, like what questions should someone be asking if they're looking to find an accent coach? Like, how do you tell a good one from a bad one? Like, some obviously you want someone beyond like, don't say it like that. So, what's the
Well,
differentiators?
that's a start. I mean, coaching is coaching, and that's a start. But if you're really looking for, someone that with the experience and the understanding of what needs to happen, I would probably recommend, asking, what is your methodology based on what are the foundations that you create or that you have me develop to build a foundation that I can build upon. What is the stem? What is the root that I need to establish and master so that I can, place these pieces on top. That's one thing that I see a lot because, this pronunciation thing is kind of like the Wild West. There's
Uh-huh.
no governing body really. There's no accreditation. There's not really a school where you can go to. So a lot of people can teach you some things, but they might teach you, with holes and gaps and things like that. So I think understanding, what characteristics all American accent comes from, and then finding out, what is their approach to teaching that is probably the best way to understand whether or not this person has the knowledge and experience to guide you in that way. And I would say the first thing that person should be answering you would be that they're going to focus on placement and rhythm. Those
Hmm.
two things. If you're not mastering placement and rhythm and you're working on other parts of the language, you'll see some success, you'll see some improvement, but there's always going to be this big gaping hole, and there's going to be parts of the language that you won't be able to achieve because you don't understand and you don't hear those two characteristics that create everything about the American sound: placement and rhythm.
Awesome. Awesome. I didn't realize that before talking to you today. So I'm learning something. This is a great talk. Lastly, with all that said, what is the best way for someone to get in contact with you if they would like to work with you on this?
Oh, this is the easiest one. So you could find me all over the place. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. I just started TikTok. But if you just Google Boost Up English, if you go to Instagram, Boost Up English, you can find me on LinkedIn, Josh Lewis, American Accent Coach. Lewis is Lewis. And yeah, I mean, I have my website, boostupenglish.com. So you can find all of my social media through that website as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that is the last of my questions, Josh. It was a pleasure to speak to you. I learned a lot here. Hopefully, anyone listening to these clips has learned as well. Good luck with your business, and I will keep my eye out for your content.
This was
It's always
great,
been
Ray. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, and I had a lot of fun.
awesome. Take care.
Cool.